And to discuss this, I'm joined by Iran analyst and CEO of Carpo think tank, Adnan Tabatabai, along with foreign policy analyst Everett P. Joseph, a senior fellow at the Johns Hopkins University. Adnan, let me begin with you. What is your initial reaction to this huge development and the fact that China has made this possible, something that the US has not been able to do for the longest time?
Well, I have to say that the China dimension here is a big surprise, I have to admit. So what is not a surprise is that Iran and Saudi Arabia are finding a pathway towards resuming diplomatic ties and taking a further step towards rapprochement. We have had 3 years of talks being held in Iraq and Oman. So this process has been going on for quite some time. It started in April 2020. But apparently last year in fall, during Xi Jinping's visit to Saudi Arabia, and then later President Ibrahim Raisi's visit to China in February, this process of elevating these talks from a regional format being hosted by Iraq and Oman to a, let's say, global format by having China as the host of the finalization of this process, this has come as a surprise, I have to say. So this is the, let's say, surprising bit, while the essence of the news of today has been in the making for some time.
And it is a surprise that the US will not be very happy about, Edward. What does this really mean for America's so-called dominance in this part of the world?
Again, but we need to really apply perspective on this before rushing to all sorts of conclusions. The U.S. role in the Middle East is one of American disinterest. The U.S. has been trying to move out and away from the Middle East for years, ever since the reaction to the Iraq War in the United States under President Obama, the famous pivot to Asia. This is the pivot to confront Chinese expansionism in Asia. So we have to put this in perspective. This isn't some kind of competition where the U.S. seeks greater influence in the Middle East and China has somehow elbowed it out. The U.S. has not, and that's number one. Number two is we have to remember that China and the United States do not approach the Middle East from the same standpoint. China doesn't care about what happens internally in these countries. China doesn't care that Iran kills protesters, peaceful protesters, perhaps even poisoning girls in schools. China doesn't care about that. China doesn't care that Jamal Khashoggi was murdered in a Saudi consulate in Turkey. So China operates on money. So as your report, as you yourself indicated, and so that makes things very easy. If you're operating purely on money, you can have strategic partnership with Iran. You can have great investment with the Saudis, and you have an entree. And it really, in fact, is sort of surprising that it's, in my view, that China has taken this long to really establish any type of political profile in the region, if we think about it. And the other thing is, of course, is the United States has no diplomatic relations with Iran. So since 1979, since the revolution. So again, we have to put this in perspective. The last thing we have to do is put in perspective about this famous breakthrough. Look, it's not for nothing that Saudi and Iran have had such tortured relations for the past years. It's not just some whimsical difference in personalities or something between Iranian and Saudi leaders. They have very sharp differences, and it remains to be seen whether an agreement brokered by China that probably has money attached to it will actually last. What will actually happen in Yemen? What will the Iranian role in Syria be? These are the types of roles that Iran has played that have threatened Saudi and threatened Saudi's Gulf neighbors and produced these tensions. So, yes, it's significant. I don't want to say it's not, but we have to keep this all in some kind of perspective before rushing to a conclusion that this is somehow kind of new geopolitical era that we're in. We're not yet there. Please.
Adnan, how do you react to that? And also, can you tell us more about what we know about what went on behind the scenes for this truce to really happen?
No, I think I would agree that we have to obviously wait and see. We have to wait and see whether the 2 months period that is outlined in the joint statement, which is a hell lot of time in this part of the world, a lot of things can happen. And if we look at some of the reactions to this piece of news, partly coming from DC, I'm not talking about officials here, I'm talking about some on the think tank scene, there will be states, there will be non-state actors that will, from today onwards, put every effort into trying to torpedo this because of their very own geopolitical interests. I do share the assessment that China doesn't care about internal affairs in this region. But if we're honest, the US doesn't either, as long as its regional or geopolitical interests are met. Even if you know who is the perpetrator behind a targeted killing abroad, is not going to be held. Relations to that country may be somewhat, I'm talking about Saudi Arabia here, maybe somewhat negative, but the partnership continues because of US interests. And I'm not saying that it's a legitimate thing to be interest driven, but I would really say that in fact, for China, it's of course economic interests, but it's also the issue of energy security. For China, it's crucial not to have a too explosive region in the Strait of Hormuz in the Persian Gulf to balance its relations to key energy suppliers in the region. So it's more than just economy, it's also security interests. I cannot speak about what has happened behind the scenes. I think that there will have been serious talks between Iran and Saudi Arabia about the different contexts, be it Yemen, be it Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon, where these two countries have had opposing interests. And your other guest is correct in saying this rivalry has been for a reason, and the competition and rivalry will continue. It's impossible to imagine these two not being rivals, but it is possible that there is a modus vivendi between them, that there are some arrangements, and maybe we can speak about the different countries and the contexts. But yeah, back to you.
Right, Edward, let me also ask you to just talk about the relationship between the two countries and why any change in this equation has serious and far-reaching implications for the entire region.
It has those implications precisely for the intro that you provided, the very comprehensive and accurate introduction that you provided. These are the two behemoths in the Middle East, Iran and Saudi Arabia. These are the two large dynamic force factors in the Middle East, and you correctly pointed out to the schism. There you have the Shiite Saudi schism, and you have a power schism here. Turkey, of course, is another, is the third power factor. But Turkey, again, a Sunni state like Saudi Arabia. And we have to understand another dynamic here that we cannot overlook. It cannot be overlooked in some type of, popping champagne corks about diplomatic relations and things like this that cannot be covered. And that's Iran's nuclear program. The diplomatic relations will not eliminate Saudi concern over Iran obtaining a nuclear weapon. And anyone who thinks that, oh, well, gee, this China broker deal, again, no doubt financially driven because, again, China simply will not mention anything about human rights. And I have to differ slightly with the respected other guests that the United States does care about these issues. It balances its relationship with the Saudis, but President Biden released the CIA report that fingered MSB for the killing, and only with great reluctance did the fist bump, the famous fist bump. And we know how much in MSB, Mohammed bin Salman resents that, just this fist bump, and how much that spite drives this relationship. So human rights are a factor. in the relationship. NBS likes the fact, Mohammed bin Salman, that China doesn't care about any of these human rights issues, and we don't even need to speak about Iran. Again, the U.S. and its EU allies are very concerned about how Iran treats its own people, its own citizens, and China, again, couldn't care. Why? Because China does the same within China. And I should underscore here one other irony, permit me. China is the worst abuser of the human rights of Muslims in the world. So you have these two so-called promoters and defenders of the Islamic faith, Iran and of course Saudi, which we're home of Mecca, being pulled into agreement when it is China that interns over 1 million Muslim Uyghurs solely because of their Muslim religion, amounting to what the United States has called genocide and what some UN agencies have called crimes against humanity. So tremendous irony here, and again,
consistency as well. Edward, I'm sorry to interrupt you there. Just hold that thought. There are some breaking inputs coming in right this minute as we have been talking about how America will be viewing these developments and talking about the reactions trickling in. Just a few moments ago, we've gotten this reaction with the White House welcoming the Iran-Saudi deal. That's the latest input that we have at this point. But at the same time, the statement goes on to say that it is skeptical that Tehran will be meeting the obligations, quote unquote. Adnan, if you can quickly comment on this, what do you make of the statement?
Well, I mean, as I said, it's going to be interesting to watch. I mean, the things that are outlined in the statement, the reference to documents that were already developed and signed in 1998 and 2001 between the two countries, are in fact seem to be a parallel universe to what we see today, with these two countries doing significant harm to each other, or at least have been doing significant harm to each other in the past. And of course, there has to be caution, there has to be skepticism towards whether this will all really and truly materialize. So that's why I wouldn't be surprised. I think it's a wise thing to do. I really think nobody is popping up champagne bottles, particularly because we're talking about two Muslim countries here. There is no festive mood, but there is at least, and I think this is granted, a moment of appreciation for a diplomatic breakthrough, something that can lead to a bit of a geopolitical shift in the region if it really materializes and moves on like this. So that is the real question. But again, there are different indicators we will have to really look at and wait and see a bit.
Indeed. Edward, what's your reading of the reaction coming in from the White House? Does it come along expected lines?
I think this is, they're putting the best face on it. And in a way that it's correct. And I agree here with the other speaker that there is some potential here, for example, for de-escalation in Yemen. That part is positive, that the long-suffering people of Yemen could perhaps see some improvement in their lives if Iran and Saudi have this rapprochement. Similarly, in Syria, there could be improvement in the lives of Syrian citizens who've been battered by the fact that Iran has supported this brutal regime of Bashar Assad. So those in those two things, if you get a de-escalation, rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, the citizens of those two countries could benefit from that reduction in tensions. But again, we have obstacles here that I do not see this again as some brave new era of peace. Again, the biggest stumbling block, Iran's nuclear program, which it shows no indication whatsoever of wanting to give up. And this is not something that you can just have rapprochement about. This is a fundamental threat. Saudi and its Gulf neighbors are simply inherently threatened by the fact of Iran being so close to having a nuclear weapon. And any country in the world can see the behavior in Russia towards Ukraine, the behavior of North Korea, how dangerous it is when a regime like this, an autocratic, brutal dictatorial regime, obtains a nuclear weapon, how aggressive they can become to their neighbors, and what a menace they are. And that will not go away simply because they exchange embassies. And again, forgive me for the champagne corks, but that type of euphoria, it does not conceal this. And again, we have to remember we're talking about a broker here, China, that doesn't care about any of those issues, doesn't care, only wants its oil, as the other speaker correctly said, wants oil to flow, doesn't care about what happens to Iranian citizens, doesn't care about anything in Saudi and the kingdom internally, only cares about its oil and its own influence in the region. And that's why, again, these type of agreements, they catch a lot of attention, but we have to really understand the dynamics, the underlying dynamics that bring Saudi and Iran into conflict and into tension. Please.
Right, Edward and Adnan, we're leaving it there for the moment. Thanks very much, gentlemen, for joining us on Gravitas and helping us decode the implications of China brokering those talks between two regional rivals and the implications of these developments for the region. Thanks very much.